Hi people, who are you?
Hello.
Are you also on Facebook so everyone can follow or what?
Oh yeah, okay.
You can see each other, right?
It's not a live thing. I'm just recording it.
Right.
Because some people can't be on here.
All right. The idea today is to kick off your thesis. Right. It's past the time where you should start thinking about it, and we are approaching the time where you should be seriously thinking about your final part of this program, the thesis. Right. The idea is that this is a Q&A. What are we supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? And what are we offering? Helle is here in part as the thesis supervisor, experienced thesis supervisor. But as you know, Helle has also been head of studies for anthropology for decades, a number of years. Yes. So Helle knows more about writing theses and what the do's and don'ts than I do, as such. Unfortunately, John could not be here today. He's also supervising a lot of students, but I'll try to fill in his shoes as best as I can. I think you can find a lot of the information that you need online, right? So the best place to go first, if you haven't been there already, is to go online, because youre has put up a lot of information, and he's always telling you, before you mail me, try to look it up, right? Have you done that? Yes, we have. Great. More or less. And so you know that you're supposed to find a supervisor, and you have a thesis contract that you have to write. And this thesis contract will be approved or not by the head of studies. That's me. So this means that your thesis topic must be within what we do in global development. So let me start by just saying what you cannot write about. Journalism. Communication is not part of what we do. Okay, so I think this is the only area where some of you tend to move towards communication that turns to be journalism, and that's what we do not want. Apart from that, when you ask what can I write about, the answer is almost everything that we've been doing. Right? It's best to relate it to parts of what we've done in global development, also to your internship or to the coursework you're doing right now also. Also, supervisors, you should look at supervisors mainly from the program, but all departments involved in the program will give you supervisors. So it's not only the people you know, you can also reach out to other people in these departments. Then there's the question of political science, because a lot of you have a bachelor background in political science, and you are eager to find political scientists. The department has opted out, they do not supervise anyone. So unfortunately, you cannot get anyone from the Department of Political Science at University of Copenhagen. They are fully booked. And I know this is a disappointment. We do have other options at Food and Resource Economics. They are also sort of doing political science, I would say, and also the kind of political science where you may have more interest, right? Political scientists here at our department are a lot of them are very focused on Denmark, I would say. But I have to say that because they won't supervise you anyway. These were the negative parts. The positive is you are now engaging in something that's even better than what you've done so far. It's a great experience writing a thesis, and you have so many ups and downs during this period. And I think the experience is often that try to manage your downs and make them short, and use your supervisor partly for that.
And your writing group.
And your writing group, exactly. We do not establish writing groups necessarily. Some supervisors do have these teams. You're now so used to working in teams, but I guess you can see the advantage. Right? And it's also a great advantage, even though you're not writing on exactly the same topic, supporting each other, assisting each other in the writing and fighting and discussions is always great. I know that Christian Lund is using it.
I do.
Helle is using it very efficiently, so we have groups of 3 and 4. But it's an option.
It's an option. I think what you can't do without is a pair of other eyes. You need a reader, and that's not your supervisor. Your supervisor will read, but don't let your supervisor be your first reader. That's a waste of everybody's time. It's not how you use your supervisor most efficiently, I think. So always have somebody you can sort of say, I'm thinking of this, I've written this. Could you just comment on that for me? It's invaluable.
Should we try organizing this as a Q&A? It would probably be better than us talking all the time.
I think there's one thing that we should add in terms of which subjects can and cannot be approved, because the true communication thing is one of it. But in general, the methodology and the data, it has to be social science related. So we've had a few examples where people show up with something that seems more like a literature study in some way, or they want to do a lot of discourse analysis. And that can be part of it, but it can't be the bulk part of it. That's an important addition. For some of you, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever, but some are thinking doing something that's sort of crossing over a little bit between social science and humanities sometimes, and the bulk part has to be in what we consider social science.
So what happens if you actually send in a proposal and it rebounds? And then what happens is that you get an explanation why it was not accepted, and you rewrite it. That's basically it.
But you're aware of the deadline, the 1st December, to send in the proposal. Right?
How much can we change the topic after it has been approved?
I mean, I think the experience is that people change it quite a lot. Because the data simply comes up with something else, more interesting, and so on and so forth. So of course.
But if you wanted to change everything from thematic to geographic focus and everything,
yeah,
basically, you can
then
still do it.
You do it discussing with your supervisor.
Yes. And if you do get into something that is completely different from the proposal you send in, then of course you talk to your supervisor. Is this still something that you can supervise? Is it something that falls within global development, you would say? And then thirdly, you'd send it to me and I'll take it up with Henrik again for yeah.
And in the end, a thesis is just like any other exam as such. You have 3 attempts. So if you change everything in the last second, then you use your second attempt. That's done before. That's been done.
But rarely. I mean,
Yes.
it's not. No.
Yeah.
Your second and third theses, are they do they have to be entirely different in subject matter, or are they really just an extension?
It's a bit too early to start that one, but
I'm not planning on doing so.
you have to make some changes
Okay.
to your project. But whatever you write, you always make small changes along the way as you get know more about the topic. We're not asking you to write a completely new thesis.
I think there's one thing which is really important that you will think about now, and that is, again, talk with your supervisor about this, because certainly in the Department of Anthropology, we now have very, very tight sort of regulation of what we get for what. And we get number of hours for the supervision in the semester where you are supervised, not in the next, although you would extend. So it means people will be working Saturday, Sunday, kind of, if you need supervision after this summer. I don't think they're going to like that very much. So just to sort of,
Just for the online people, we should just repeat the question
Yeah.
whenever you have, because the microphone is there. So.
Oh, right. Okay. And it's not to scare you, it's just it's important that you keep your supervisor informed of what it is you're planning to do, so that they can get back to you and say, well, it's not feasible, I'm not here, for example, or whatever it might be. No? So.
What if you, for example, I don't know if this is going to happen, but if you along the way feel that maybe something that you thought would be only qual becomes also a bit of quant, maybe. And then you need someone to also check the quant part, if that's okay. But you already have a qual supervisor, so how do you do that? Is it even allowed? Especially if it's something extra that that person would have to do.
All right. I'm not sure if they heard the question. The question is, if you're writing a qual thesis, predominantly qual thesis, you thought of that at the beginning, it turns more quant, or reverse, right? You can also have exactly the reverse. You start out thinking I'm a quant person, but then realize that you learn something from talking to people. And then you have either a quant or a qual supervisor. What do you do? Since we really encourage this in the program, that you try to do mixed methods or have both, I would say that most teachers in the program are fairly large in terms of giving advice. So you can either try with 2 advisors and they can split. If you truly want to go down that road, you can have 2 supervisors. They would then have to decide how to split it. Otherwise, if it's a quant thesis and a quant question, you can always ask some of the quant people. I mean, Sam, Thomas, John and me, we are scary but nice. Deep down, we actually like people. And we do have questions across the board, and you can also ask Helle about, I guess, interviews. Of course, if it gets to the...
If you have to sit down and read large sort of parts, chunks of a thesis, in Department of Anthropology it's not going to happen unless people are given normal hours. I might as well be very clear about that, because of the situation now. So, but that can be managed again with if you ask your supervisor to say that I'm thinking I need this. I would like to allocate 1 hour to, and that's fine. That will be done.
Yeah. And I would love you to do these things. Actually working both with qual and quant. It's just better.
Could you tell a little bit more about the difference between the types of theses? Because I see online that you distinguish between 3 different kinds, and I'm considering doing the internship-based one, but I'm not quite sure what is different from just the classic format if I do that. Yeah.
Yes. The question was if we can explain a bit more about the 3 different types of thesis that you can write. You can write either what we call a classical thesis, I think, and then an internship-based thesis, and then an article thesis. Let me start with the easy one. The classical thesis is where you have a topic or some ideas, something that you would like to look into in different ways, and you write 60, 80 pages, like a monograph, basically, with chapters, and that's how you build it up. Then you can use your internship period, and we think that that's a very good idea. And it also means that you would use the period where you gather data, also, or get information from the place you're working. Very often this would be a company or an NGO. Right, and then you can collaborate with the company or the NGO on a project, and you can then turn this project. These projects are often less academic than a thesis, but then what we want is that you add the academic content to this project-driven topic that you have, right? So that's why I'm thinking it's very often if you have good collaboration with an NGO doing some work somewhere, you would like to continue, you get the data. And the data, again, is very broad. It could be data about the organization, about the people you work with, civil society at large, or governments. And then you add substance in terms of theory. As such, right?
But it's in separate papers also.
These would often you would split it up because we know that the NGO would have very little interest in the very academic part, we want something that the external examiners can assess as academic work. So you split it into some kind of a policy paper, or an NGO, or public use. This is great, and then you have the scientific, scholarly paper also, right? And that's the split you make, where it would be mixed in a classical thesis. You know, you would have some parts that are describing your data in depth. You can take this out of the policy part very often and have the thick data description and analysis, or no, well, basically the theory parts in what you hand in there. Both will be assessed, right? So both will be part of what you actually submit for assessment. The supervisor and the external examiner will read both, and they will just know that when they're reading the policy paper or whatever, it's not supposed to be academic. It's supposed to be outreach, as such. The third part is the journal article style, and that's because if you want to pursue some more academic career, in parts of what we do, we write in short pieces. I think anthropology is more longer pieces and books. When you move towards political science, economics, we rarely read more than 20 pages, 30 pages, right? And it's very condensed. So you present a condensed journal article style, basically what you read from scientific literature. And in addition to this, you have your thoughts very often on the ethics, broader descriptions about your data, because there's not room for that. But you would have all the background descriptions. So they look a bit like each other, these two alternatives. One is just, you make an outreach or policy brief. The other is you make a journal paper and a background thing.
I think we have done it for some years in the Department of Anthropology, and I think it's important to realize that it's not easier to do the separate papers. In fact, it might be a little more difficult, demanding. So don't do it because you think, it looks as if it's more manageable. It's not necessarily, but it's an option you could choose if it fits with what you would like to do. Now, for an anthropologist, I think it would not be an argument to say that it's more in my favor if I do an article instead of a thesis. It doesn't work like that. It's not either or. It depends on what you end up writing. So, but I think you should be very clear about what you cannot do if you do this collection of papers. That is, you miss out on an opportunity to kind of describe a world, because you have very limited. If you only have an article, say, that's what often is cut out. No? The ethnography basically is missing, and that's a question whether you want to do that. Whereas you can, in a thesis, there's actually space to also develop your own concepts in a way which is more difficult in the first time you write a journal article.
So if you write,
It's just so, cause right now I'm planning to get the data from my internship organization, but with that in mind that you just said, could I then still do the classic format?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, so, okay.
Yes.
The question was whether you can do a classic format if your data is based on the internship, and the answer is yes. The type of thesis is your choice. And we strongly encourage that you use your internship to gather data, because there's so limited time to write this thesis. So doing fieldwork in the spring is going to stress you enormously. It's much better if you have your data. And you can. It's an option again to do it. It's more if the internship version is if you have an arrangement with. That's why I'm saying an NGO. Typically, it would be organizations that would truly like you to give them a product, right? And then we have this option.
Let me just clarify. It's not that I'm discouraging that you use the other models. It's just that you really think about why you want to consider choosing something else.
Right.
And of course, it's up to you, and they are there because we believe that they make sense. So.
If you choose to do a journal article and do you have to find somewhere to publish it yourself if you want to publish it at some point, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you have to aim it towards something. Otherwise, it's very difficult to judge whether this is, where have you thought this should go in the world.
Okay.
So you would want to, not that it has to be accepted, but just that this is written for this journal.
Yeah.
Right. And that will also make your job easier, because then you know what you're targeting.
One comment on this. Take the discussion with your supervisor early on, right? One of the first or second meeting, if you have ideas for either the journal article or the internship report or internship based, discuss this with your supervisor whether or not it's feasible. A lot of our supervisors now have experience with these different kinds, and it's often driven by your idea or problem. Right? Some of the ideas are great for journal articles. You know, you have one very sharp thing you want to do, and then this fits. Right? But remember, in journal articles, as you've seen, there can be only one idea, right? And it's extremely hard to cut it right. It's truly so. So this is mainly if you really need this product for your future career. That's how you should think about it. If not, the classical thesis has proven to be a good way of doing things, right? And that's why we have it. Yes.
When would you recommend as like a cut-off point for when we decide like which kind of thesis we're going to do?
17th of January.
No.
I think this is something you should wait. It depends again on the question and your supervisor, because you can get quite far with a classical thesis and then decide, oh, I would like to turn this, or you could be working with an internship-based thing and then decide, wait a minute, this policy brief turns into something very technical.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually it's quite hard to write policy briefs, right? Also, and to do this kind of dissemination. And of course, then you can start either splitting or merging.
Yeah.
And both are difficult. But you have to realize now that you're going to rewrite your own work so many times. So in that sense, if you quit at writing, you can do it fairly late. A person like me who spends hours on a sentence, I should decide from the outset. I mean, I do tables every morning, but I spend days and days writing a page. So that depends on how you work.
For many students, writing a thesis actually begins with writing little pieces of, something of interest or the other. And then you write and write and write, and you have this, and then you start thinking about, okay, how can this add up into, And at that point, I think it will also be much easier to kind of finally say, well, I'll go for the model-based, classic, or it won't fail your classic model, but it might be quite clear that this is going to make my life more difficult if I choose one of the others, or So don't sit and wait. You start writing, and then you decide. You don't think that you should only start writing after you've decided. That would be not the smart move. So whatever you do, start writing.
I'm just going to jump in here. Miriam is asking, if you already know that you will do mixed methods, how does it work with two supervisors? Do you need a special contract, or do you just talk it all through with the supervisors?
We do not have a special contract for joint supervisors, so you talk it through with the supervisors. My suggestion is that you contact supervisors and saying, I would like to have you, the two of you, I would like to do mixed methods on this and that topic. I would say that the supervisors, we are specialists in our fields. It's mainly the question that can be the limitation, right? I think we're all open with the limitations in the Department of Anthropology at present. They work by the rules at present, right?
We cut down. Basically, the number of staff is cut down to a ridiculous number of people. So people get like this, But that's not your concern. It's just that,
I would say that all teachers in this program have a keen interest in actually using mixed methods and trying to get this out that it is actually good to accept multiple methods when you get into a problem. So it's the problem that determines the kind of supervisor you want within these methodological divisions. But we have no special contract. That's the answer. Yep.
How strict are the fieldwork to desk-based study ratio? How much do you expect of us to do fieldwork?
The question was how much fieldwork you're expected to do if we have a fixed ratio, like 2 months abroad. No, and that, you have to do 2 interviews, 5 focus groups, 2 participant observations, and a table. We do not have any rules for that because that depends again on your topic and how you do it. When you're writing within close to anthropology, it's very hard to imagine a thesis without fieldwork. When you're writing close to economics, you would often use secondary data, and there would be no fieldwork or very little. It would, if you're not doing mixed methods, you do a lot of statistics or possible or theory, whatever. Theory alone is probably not within the ideas of global business, global business, anything else, global development. But you can work purely on secondary data. So we have no fixed rule on that.
But also, even if you work within closer to anthropology, I would really ask you to consider carefully how much field work you want to do, because it just adds so much time to the work in your thesis writing. So I would be really quite concerned if one of my students came and say, I'm going on a 2 months field work out of 6 months to write a thesis. Say it's not feasible. It would be very, very difficult to do. So and field work can be many things. And I think that the key here is that you are really well prepared, and you do not only draw on your limited data as sort of, but you actually make sure that you have data you can draw on. Then 1 or 2 interviews can be insightful, or whatever, 3. I mean, but don't think that you should go out and collect masses of stuff if you want to kind of do it within a manageable amount of time. It's not expected of you.
You should remember that you're global development people. You are not anthropologists, you're not political scientists or economists, sociologists as such. And it means that if you think of thesis and compare to anthropologists what they do, you have way less in terms of fieldwork. And because they spend a year, right? The first 6 months they plan and do their fieldwork, and then they organize and write about this. That's not what we do. And if you try to mimic this, you run the risk of being assessed as if you're an anthropologist. And we're not. So there will be a disappointment suddenly, right? Likewise, if you go strictly into economics, then they will think of you as an economist. So again, staying sort of in the middle ground and being driven by your ideas.
I think what is really important here in this education is that if you think of yourself as wanting to work in the development world, which I think is quite likely, then what you would need and what you would gain from here is be able to approach people and actually try and make sense of local experiences of something, of some phenomenon, and that is possible to do that in various ways. The internet is a fantastic thing today, so that's another way also of getting a perspective. So I'm not trying to discourage you from go out and meet and talk to people, just to limit the time you allow yourself to do this.
What kind of ethics approval is required, or is it that just a matter to work out with our supervisor?
That's a good point. We have it in a project proposal they write in the department, but here it's all the plan with your supervisor, basically. It's a very highly relevant question, and don't forget to take it up.
Yeah.
That's the best I can say, and keep thinking about it as you go along. It will be expected that you discuss this in your thesis.
Yeah.
Helle and I have ongoing discussions on whether or not we should have a panel.
Yes.
And Helle and the anthropologists think that it should be deeply ingrained in any researcher always to think and behave ethically. And me as an economist, I'm a regulator, so of course I think I'm an external board. But right now we do not have a board, so this will be what you do with your supervisor. But again,
It's probably coming.
it will come up, some of these issues, if they're relevant to your project.
Yeah.
And again, working with secondary data where you have huge amount of numbers, ethics is not the first thing you think about. But any encounter, contact with real people will of course give you considerations.
And also you want to consider your own safety. I think that students often forget that. We had just recently a student writing who were planning to take part in illegal activities as part of fieldwork. Now that's just a really bad idea. so think about your own safety. We want your home back safe again. We basically cannot approve of things which are a danger to you or the people you work with.
There are many different texts, books, shorter papers on how to manage your thesis, how to manage your supervisor, and I would just say they're not bad. It's actually thinking of this as a project for you, where there's a long process that you have to manage, and the whole point of this is that you have to learn how to manage your own learning. Right? And that's also what supervisors are. Supervisors. They're no longer your teachers. So a lot of what's going to happen is centered in and around you. And thinking of this as a project also for yourself at this process, you can get, some of these books are not that good, but you actually also get some good hints on how to manage time, how to manage the supervisor, what is the supervisor meeting, right? It's extremely important that you start out with agreements with your supervisor. How are our meetings going to be? How often do we meet? What should I prepare? What do I expect from you? Also, right? And the supervisor will say, I will not do this. We have these discussions, how large fractions do they actually read, the different supervisors? A lot of supervisors read almost everything along the way, but only once. And I can also explain why, because in the beginning I would read over and over again what students would be handing in. In the end, you mark yourself as a supervisor, right? So you read, you give comments, and that's it. Then it's up to you, because we do not want to mark ourselves, right, in this. But again, it varies by topic, by supervisor. But make sure during the first meeting or so, how do we plan this, and what is the process? What do we try to do? And having some forms, templates, papers where you do this also not only about your thesis, but about your process is actually also helpful. Okay, so the process here is important. It's the end goal, and this is what is evaluated, but it's a long journey.
But it's also fun. I think that's really important. It's actually a really fantastic thing to have 6 months to work on something you have chosen yourself. So enjoy it.
For many of you, these are the last months of freedom. Sorry. Sorry. The other end is work.
There's a follow-up question here. If a person from the internship organization could become a co-supervisor?
In general, this is not a good idea, because if there's a conflict of interest of any kind between you and the supervisor, then the university has no control. Remember, all the supervisors you have are hired by University of Copenhagen when you're using ordinary supervisor. It means that there's, I don't know, ranks and files. There's if there's a disagreement of any kind, we have an organized way of dealing with this. with external supervisors like this, no relation to the University of Copenhagen, there's no way of dealing with it. In principle, he or she can run off with your project completely. I mean, that's one of the worst case scenarios I can think about, taking your work, putting their own name on this, and that suddenly is outside our real. We know what to do here, or this will not happen because we used to work with it. So I would. It's not possible in the contract, and I would strongly advise against it.
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
Let's even make it completely clear.
It,
It's not an option.
it does not exclude talking to your people,
Absolutely
your
not.
supervisors from the internship. Hopefully they become part of your friends or mentors in other ways, and in that capacity they're extremely valuable.
Anna asks if if you're writing your thesis with someone else, what are the sort of requirements, or what she asks about pages and so on. Well, basically it's 50% extra per person, extra up till, can't remember how many. We've never had more than 2 people writing together, but I can't remember if it's actually allowed for 3 or 4.
And I will really recommend it. We have had an increasing number now of students writing together, and the theses tend to get better. So it's a win-win, really. You always have somebody who's as keen that what you've written to read what you've written. So this sort of possibility of sending things back and forth, always discussing, I would go for it.
You also see this in what we do in research, in the whole academic service. We are working in groups and teams now, more and more, except for monographs. But in particular in science and more you see.
Even in ours, it's coming.
Yeah. So, and again, exactly this, you have another person who is as interested in what you do as you are. What you need to do is to be open, and just like you with your supervisor, be specific about expectations and how you work. But you're now so used to working in teams, so you know that this initial conversation is important. And make sure you have arrangement and you discuss this before you get into disagreements, if any. But almost all of these, most end up without any disagreements at all, and very, very good projects. Very good. Yes, we can really recommend it. If not, again, teams where you read each other's work, where you simply engage and say, I would, joint support truly works well. Yeah.
The defense, will that be done, if we're working in a pair, will that be done individually or just both together?
That's the interesting part.
The regulation has changed now.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah.
I'm just
If you're working in a pair on the thesis,
Yeah.
and when it comes around to the thesis defense, is that just done both of you together answering the questions, or does it have to be?
We actually have 2 options because the regulation have changed. So the old way, which is still possible, is that you have individual defenses. So you get, of course, it means that the thesis is a joint project, but the defense is also part of your grading. So you will defend it on your own, even though you work together. If you do this, you're not allowed to see the defense of your co-author, right? You will be, you will get there on the same day. You will get the same amount of time, but you can just not attend the other one. The other option, which has come up now, is an actual group defense. And in that situation, you write the thing together and you defend it together. You get more time. I'm not sure if you double the time, but this means that it's simply completely joint work. The writing and the talking. That's it. And Anthropology has been using the joint defense for quite a while. In economics, we love the individual defense, of course, right? But now both are options for you.
Cool. So we can choose to go that way.
Yes, but you have to tell I think you have to be for the exam administration. Ulla would have to know this early on.
And also
How
maybe
are
just check up on this and because.
Yeah, but yeah.
Just,
You're not sure if that's the.
Helle is not certain if you can do the individual defense
Something
anymore.
about choosing I'm a bit concerned about the choosing, whether it's actually, but it's probably right in this program.
I mean, so far it's been,
Right.
I think the
Good.
people doing the thesis together have been defending it together as well. And
Yes.
they've had 50% extra
Uh-huh.
time. But it might be that they actually have that you have the option
To
to
do it
choose to do
individually.
it individually.
Because the year before they were individual.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You will get more information. Yes?
I am asking for another student who isn't here or there, but I just wanted to ask, so the deadlines are 1st of December and 1st of June, and no negotiation, and also if, for example, you want to take a holiday for a semester or you want to do something else, do you just not register for the thesis now and then you register later, or how exactly does it work?
But not June, no?
Yes.
Also,
What?
sorry, is it?
For
June?
now. Yeah, but then it changes next year.
Right.
But still from June, so starting from the autumn 18, there will be a different set of regulations. From
Okay.
now it's December and June. And so, so the question for the people were,
Can you take a holiday?
if you can take a holiday, what do you do if you want to do something else for this semester? And the thing is that with the current regulation, you simply don't sign up. I mean, you have to finish your studies in a specific amount of time. So if you decide not to register for your thesis, then that's just adding on time, and you'll get a warning at some point saying that you haven't completed with the requirement. But then you will complete with the requirement if you hand in your thesis on time, and then it will not be a problem. But it depends very much on the individual person, how far they've gone it, and so on. So in my general advice would be sign up for the thesis.
No,
No. Yeah.
that's the point. If you are certain that you're planning not to work on your thesis in the spring,
Oh yeah, of course.
then you should not sign up, because once you sign up, the clock starts ticking. And this means that the first attempt is after 6 months, the second attempt is after 3 months, the third is then again after another
And
3
then you're
months.
out.
And then you're out.
Mm.
So if you're certain you're not going to work on the thesis, do not sign up.
Right. Once you've signed up for the thesis, the time is right, and there's no stopping after
Yeah.
that.
Mm.
So, but I'm just saying that if people are thinking about not signing up for the thesis because they have to do something else in the semester, they have to know exactly where they're at in their studies, because that depends on where they're at, how long did it take to do this and that and so on. If they're on normal time, if they've completed their 90 in 3 semesters, then they can do it and still it will not be a problem.
Mm.
But if they've missed a semester or postponed something or have outstanding exams or something like that, then it could be an issue. So that's the answer.
So actually, I mean, it's okay to not do it that one semester and then start again if you've done everything right up until now.
Yes, I mean, I mean, the thing is, you have to complete 45 ECTS in a year. So if you don't complete 45 ECTS in that year, you'll get a warning saying you haven't completed the 45 ECTS, you've only completed 30 for that semester, and then you'll get a warning saying in a year we will expel you if you do not complete with the 45 ECTS, but by that time you will probably have completed your thesis. So, the thing is that sometimes you can get into conflict with the final length of study time, which is 2 years plus 1 in this case now, so 3 years. So your final defense, say that you're postponing for your second attempt, then you might get into issues about the deadline of actually defending your thesis within the given time. So if you are thinking about these kind of things, I just encourage you to know exactly where you're at in your studies and what the regulations for the study requirement is. But you can just not sign up. We will not sign you up automatically for the thesis.
Right.
If you don't sign up, then you're not signed up.
And then, of course, if you're not signed up, you can't have a supervisor. I mean, but that's simple.
It will be a holiday in the sense that there will be no contact as such, right? Let me tell
And
you.
then you get into all kinds of issues with SU if you are getting that started. because they will know that you haven't been active for that period of time, and then they will deduct that. But I'm not an expert on that, so that is something that you would have to look into if you are planning to do that. So that's why I'm advising you to just follow the progress. That was what I meant. Not sign up if you know that you're not doing it, because that's a bad idea. But you know, in general, just advise. Just follow the 30 per semester. That's much easier.
One thing, let me just the truly hard corner in some sense is that you are supposed to finish your master degree in at most 3 years. This is the new rule, and we haven't had any cases yet if we can actually give extensions in addition to the 3 years, because it's a new rule. So it means that we are not certain how to interpret these rules and regulations, because normally you would say that kicking people out just before they hand in a thesis is actually there. You know, the punishment is not just proportional to what you did, right? You offended. But since the ministry is extremely keen on getting people out, not you as such, but anyone should leave this university in fewer and fewer years. So this is the boundary you do not want to test as such, right? So 3 years, think of this. Right? You get all kinds of warnings before that, but this one is, I don't know how we will be forced to react on this. Yes?
I just had something to add to it. Most people it wouldn't be relevant, but if you are not in the EU, per chance, the person you were asking for, there are visa requirements that you cannot take a section off for violating because you have to be enrolled for a certain amount of credit. So just something to think about. It's probably mostly me, but
we have an increasing number. That's true, actually. We have an increasing number of people where this is important.
Just repeating that, I don't know if people heard that, but the point of if you're from outside the EU, you might get into conflict with visa requirements if you decide not to sign up for your thesis on following the normal time.
I don't think it's possible.
No, you have to be a student.
That's something to.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
Good point.
So, assuming we sign up now for
Yeah.
thesis, what will the rules be for us when it comes to extensions come August?
Well, as any regular exam, you have 3 attempts.
Yeah.
So if you miss your first attempt and you miss that by not handing in your thesis on time, then you will be automatically signed up for the second.
Well, I mean, what you do is you hand in you advise, you let us know that you are not going to hand in your thesis on time, and then you have to send in a revised thesis proposal.
Yeah.
That's online as well, but you have to notify us as well, because I'm not keeping entire track on who was supposed to.
So it's basically a new contract.
So it's basically a new contract, and actually we need to see the old one as well, because the moment the way the system is set up now is that the moment you get into the system and write your new thesis proposal, it overwrites the old one. So we can't really see what was the old one. We don't just keep a copy. So you'll have to send that as well. And then then it gets approved, and then you get 3 months. And the way it is now is actually that you have, so from your deadline of handing in, if you don't hand it in, you have 2 weeks to come up with a new one, and then you have 3 months to actually do it. So it's 3.5 months addition, so to speak, from the handing in deadline for the second attempt.
Yeah.
And the same goes for the third.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where you start to get into serious problems if you haven't if you've missed a semester, like we're talking about, because then you actually get into more than the extra year. And
let me try to give you some hints about what's going on then. If let's assume, let me just paint this scenario. You have opted for 6 months additional internship outside university points and all that. This would mean that you're not starting your thesis work, but it's a great place. And then you decide to write your thesis, following part. You miss the first deadline, the second deadline, possibly the third. Now then you have to ask for an extension. This will go to the study board. And the study board will then have to decide whether or not to give you a fourth attempt. In this decision, they have to take account of your past performance in the sense that you were planning in a way that got you into this. And this will then make it harder to get the fourth attempt. All right? Because you could have planned in another way. And it all gets into legal, you should talk to Fiona because it all gets into legalities that we're not experts in, and I don't know what to do. So again, if you plan to have extended internship, holiday, whatever you plan to do, make sure that you hand in your thesis on time for the other one. Yeah.
I was just curious about the groups that you talked about in terms of you can be paired with other students to give feedback and show this work, or some supervisors do it. I don't know if my supervisor does it, but I'm interested in it. But I thought it would be neat if you could be paired with people who had kind of maybe the same topic as you, or maybe related to it. But how is you guys' experiences with that? Is that how it normally works, or is it something we work out ourselves? Or
I mean, I think again depends.
Could you repeat it?
Oh, right.
sorry.
How do we? Oh, how is it arranged? How is if you want to work in a group of students, then how is it arranged? Is it something you have to do yourself, or is it something a supervisor will do? Generally speaking, the supervisor will not do it. It's something you have to do, and I think I suggest that you have a common platform where you maybe indicate that you are interested in working and together with somebody. Now, you don't, in order to have a good working relationship, you don't need to work on the same thing. You just need another pair of eyes on your work. That's one thing. Another thing is then that you have certain supervisor like me. I work with groups of, like, depending on how many I supervise in a semester, I would have a group of global development students. And there would be a fixed number of meetings across the semester, it's a bit like Christian does. And maximum 4 students. We meet, and that work as a group also. I mean, in the sense that everybody actually read the drafts of each other. We start up 24 hours before, we all read it, and then I give feedback, and everybody else can also give feedback on that. And of course, then people meet in between if they have nothing to do with that, but if they do that. So that, again, that's a few people do that, but the majority will actually expect that you had arranged the study group. Yeah.
Just following up on the maximum minimum pay, Anna's asking about if there's a maximum for if you're writing together with someone, so it's 80 pages plus 40 pages is 110, and then Anna said if there's a minimum requirement, and that doesn't really make any difference to answer that question. I mean, quite frankly, I don't think that people end up with conflicts of handing in too little.
There is a minimum requirement. You have to hand in 2 pages.
Yes, okay. 2 pages is a minimum requirement. No, but really, it's not something you have to worry a lot about, because once you start writing, it's not a matter of feeling like, how do I get to 80 pages? It's more like, how do I make sure I don't do 160? So I wouldn't worry about that.
But this is a communication expert talking or speaking.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I would prefer to see them at around 30, 40 pages, of course. I think there is probably a lot of redundancy there. But you will have to sign up for the How to Write Well course. And it's not academic writing. Oh, sorry. No, sorry. I was just teaching yesterday and Monday. I was teaching a course for the PhD here in how to write, and what academic writing is, and what communicating writing is, and what the difference is, and why academic writing is a very tricky discipline that doesn't always do a lot of good for communicating what you've actually come up with. So. Yeah, we've been bashing academic writing a lot, with a lot of fun examples for the past couple of days.
And let me get back to the part of working together or sharing this.
Anna adds that Einstein's PhD thesis was 8 pages. That's good to remember.
Yes.
So that's a good point. Who was it? That guy who's from the Economist, from that movie, that Russell Nash. His was like half a page or something.
12 pages, I think. But
Okay.
Nash was a mathematician,
Okay.
the founder of game theory, who's also political science. Let me get this. One thing you can do, not only reading each other's paper, but also establishing work routines. So you can ask for desks here at CSS, but it's extremely hard to get these, right? But we have desks at the library, at different places where you can write your thesis, and I think you start applying now, and you get it for, I think, 3 months ahead. Asking for a place with 1 or 2 other people, and then establish an office in some sense where you go to work and come here when you're not doing field work. This would give you a good routine, right? And this is what you need to share just as well as the papers that you read. Getting up in the morning, because if you're on your own, you start thinking that, oh, I'm much better at writing at night. Some of you might do that. I did. I thought, oh, I get my best thoughts at night, and a bit of whatever I smoke, and then you get these good ideas. And then you wake up and you realize that you've done very little good work. So getting into these routines is extremely important, and that's where you need each other. Also because you need to minimize the time that you don't like it and make sure it's fun. So I would say that's just as important as writing. And it doesn't have to be in the same topic.
Another thing is when you write, and that's probably the anthropology speaking more than, Henrik can interrupt, but writing, you writing, and also ideas develop as you write. So you might have an idea, but in order to try whether it actually works, you need to start your writing. So forget this about, I'll wait until this grand idea comes popping down and then I'll write. So this day or today I'm not doing anything. Just start, and you realize that is a way of actually testing and seeing what your material, where it can go. And it's not a way. So of course it requires that you are able to distance yourself from your written, and that you are able to cut and rewrite. That's crucial. Right.
I guess this point is kind of related to what you were just talking about, but how do you decide the balance in having a topic that's too broad versus too narrow? Like I've heard advice that you should try and go for narrow as much as you can, but then you run out of not having enough to write about, So how do you pick that?
Well,
could you repeat it?
Yeah, well, how do you strike a balance between narrow and broad? The answer is that the thesis is, you are going to present an argument, and that doesn't lend itself well to broad, does it? So you want to pursue an argument, and that should more or less kind of structure how you go about dealing with your material. You can't do very much. You only have 6 months. So that's why most supervisors say go for narrow. But now, of course, all this is very relative, isn't it? What is narrow, what is broad? So you can't write a thesis in social science building on one person has said something. That is not as thesis in social science faculty. So we want to know something about a given world, and preferably some people living in this world. So given world meaning a place in the world. And then you come in and...
No, but what I hope you've seen also partly during this program is that there's the true distinction between, I guess, communication and academic writing is that we care so much about methods and understanding whether the argument is either correct, or if you can prove in some sense, or triangulate, all these different ways we have of actually saying, I believe this hypothesis or this idea to be right or true or not
convincing.
false or convincing, right? So and it's a lot harder to be convincing with a sweeping statement. So when we say narrow rather than broad, it's your statements, right? It's what you want to investigate. This is what we want you to narrow down, and we want you to narrow down such that you can make a convincing argument with the data you have. And that's where it comes in that you will be limited in your data because of time constraints.
Helena would like to come on and ask a question, which is a little longer than just me reading it at first. Helena, are you there?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I just had a question, me and someone else to ask it. In terms of the theme of like development, I mean, how much is it okay to diverge in like traditional development in that sense? I.e., if you want to do a developed world, or an issue that maybe isn't directly developed in traditional sense, does that matter, or is it really okay as long as you do that?
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, so did you get my thing about divergent traditional development, i.e. the developed world, and maybe kind of different topics around that? And then also, my second question was, is it basically okay as long as it has good methods, you use good methods, you do good field work, you have good arguments for?
Phrase that, for instance, if you want to do it on the developed world and it's an issue that isn't directly development in the traditional sense. But could you give an example?
I know her topic. So
Okay.
Okay.
She's. Helle, do you mind if I talk about your topic a bit? Because it might be clearer.
Hang on, can you hear me now? Is it clearer?
Yeah.
So my example would be that I want to do it on like my hometown and about deindustrialization. So it's not necessarily development related, but it kind of is economic development related.
Industrialization.
It's the north of England.
Deindustrialization.
Oh, deindustrialization
Well,
in
that's-
Northern England.
That's
Perfect topic.
Yes. That sounds very exciting.
Liverpool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't do field work there, but it's okay. It'll work.
Okay, yeah.
This was a good question. We have all these issues about what is development, and I hope when you started out a year and a half ago, you had other ideas, and then you met the old people. I would say that the ideas of development of your teachers is outdated. Right? We have this dichotomy with the developed world.
Speak for yourself.
No, I won't. I'll speak for you. Some people travel to other places of the world to look at the people there. You started out as a racist. I didn't. Yeah. Anthropology? Sorry, no, that's a long discussion. Going back. No, but I think that a lot of your ideas about development, looking at deindustrialization in Liverpool, a lot about migration patterns that you have seen in your home cities, countries, this is also part of global development. Of course, we would like to have links. We had some where we were in doubt, gender issues, right? Which is extremely important. Would we think of differences in sex and gender issues in the global south and in the global north? We would certainly think of differences in options, right, and possibilities. But there may not be differences in some of the discussions that can be done, regardless of where you live. So we've had one thesis looking into, right, the position of women in a developed country, and the views of discrimination, right? And of course it can be done. We would often think that it's more related to the global south, or in some sense. And the way I see Liverpool is that Liverpool is certainly part of globalization, and that has happened. The deindustrialization is part of the movement of the flow of goods to China. So I see a perfect thesis there. But you could also see other theses. What happens to people in the global north when we have migration patterns or other big flows. Right? So we're not limited to Africa. China.
Is there a deadline for when we need to have a supervisor?
Well, I mean, ideally you should talk to a supervisor before you, or at the same time as you're doing the proposal.
Yeah. So, do you have any good tips if they don't answer you?
Maybe you write to them and write Henrik, head of studies name underneath, or if it's an anthropologist, Helle's name underneath, CC.
Whose name underneath?
That's
CC.
the department of head of department. You know, that might wake them up. Strong arm. I mean, you can't expect them to write, but after a week they must reply. Unless they say they're out somewhere where there's no internet. But they should reply.
They should answer reply. Okay, is it okay to go knock on people's doors? Maybe?
Of course it is.
Okay.
You should be. We have different reactions to what is done. We just had before this meeting. We just had a meeting with Heiko, the head of studies for anthropology, about a new modality for allocating supervisors. We will initiate that next year, unfortunately, because it's a bit late for you. Some people get frustrated when you knock on their doors. In particular, people who are not involved in the program. I would say if people are involved teaching in this program, they would be, or they are expected to be open. But people that are not involved may be less welcoming for this, right? And we have a few examples from anthropology. Anthropology are apparently under pressure at present, and they're not hostile against you. They're hostile towards the system. Okay, and unfortunately, you're in between, in some sense, right? But it's not. Don't take it personally when they turn you down. Yeah.
But they might not. I mean.
But again, they might
You
not.
know?
Yes.
I mean, it's you.
Is it an anthropology?
No, it's
Okay.
one of the other departments.
Oh, diplomatic.
It's a good suggestion. Add either the head of department or me as CC, right?
Yeah.
And because then we know you can also have your own bit. Because then we know there's communication going. And again, we just file it if it works out well. If not, we have the
Head of studies is better.
head of studies is
Also
probably better
anthropology.
there.
Because
Yes.
they are with the supervisor. So
Yeah.
write the head of studies if it's anthropology.
If anthropology, or if you don't know it, put me on CC. Yes.
Thanks.
This is a follow-up, and perhaps you obviously can't answer for people who aren't here, like supervisors who aren't here. But if you're struggling to find a supervisor because we didn't have that many teachers on the course, so people that didn't teach on the course and therefore have a less of a direct interest, or anthropology is a massive department, for example. If you're struggling to find a supervisor by the deadline, what do you suggest we do?
I would really recommend that you do whatever you can to find a supervisor, because a deadline is good in the sense that it pushes you.
Yeah.
I know it's hard work, but you don't want to take this off. You don't want to waste a month of your thesis work running around trying to figure out who, to approach. And you need somebody to discuss your proposal with in order to land the deadline of 1st of December.
But of course, if you really haven't found anyone by that time, and then we will look at it and then say, yeah, it's probably fine, and
Okay.
and we've been in a few situations where people have really struggled to find a supervisor, and we work that out.
Okay.
So of course we'll find a way through that at some point. Sure.
How closely related should your supervisor's field of expertise be to your thesis topic? Like, is that, I mean, of course, that might be how you originally go about selecting somebody, but then if they don't answer you, or how,
I mean, ideally, it's wonderful to supervise something you are working on yourself, but it happens rarely. So a lot of us supervise all kinds of things. But of course, I mean, I think it's fair to be very clear. As a supervisor, to say this is not my field of expertise. I'm happy to supervise you. I'll do it to my best of knowledge, but it's not my field. But it's you who are becoming the experts in something you're doing. So it can be done, and it can be done with great success also. Yeah.
If your supervisor accepts supervising you, then you would expect that they feel fine about it. Of course, often, the very exact literature may not be there, but that's part of it that you also learn to search, right? And they give advice. Very often they can give you advice on the quality of the literature you find, more than actually giving you direct directions in some sense. Read this and that. We have a broad overview, and we have a good sense of quality. And I think that's more important when in this phase where you want this. And once you start writing, it's just as much the process that we know about as the product.
Just because I already talked to someone, but that person was kind of really talking about what to develop the idea, but he's not quite sure if he feels like he kind of thinks that the topic is a bit away from his expertise. But can you kind of write the proposal with him, and he's kind of like saying, if you don't find someone else, I'll do it, but then later you can change it. Is there like a deadline for changing supervisor?
Not really, but it's not a good idea. It's actually not a good idea to have a reluctant supervisor in that sense, because it's very if you develop an idea with one person, then it can be very hard to find another as such. So I would advise you to ask him or her, either or.
Okay.
It's a yes, no. A maybe decision is not going to work here. You develop this together, and he or she will supervise you, or you find another person to develop the project.
Okay.
There's a question if it's possible to have 2 supervisors from the same department.
Yes.
Really?
Of course you can.
But in which case does it make?
But why?
Best, but why? That's the only thing more than it. But okay, possible, but but maybe do you have examples of that? Do people actually do? I mean,
No, we don't.
you don't. In anthropology, no.
For master thesis, it's rare, I would say.
I figured maybe some supervisor would be a little reluctant to. I mean, feel that it was a little redundant to have 2 from this. I mean, they would be overlapping so much.
Yeah.
I suppose.
It's not true. We actually do it when we again in parts in economics we can have be very strong on methods, and other people can be very strong on the contents or anything. If I could be a supervisor strictly in methods, where another person would be the one dealing with consumption saving. Right? So
Yeah. Okay.
that's not-
So that would be a methods and content split, maybe. Also.
When we have these kinds of splits, we do this, and that's because but I don't see that the thesis for global development would go in this direction. We can sometimes when the students want to do something very technical, in some sense, then we have a very technical supervisor for this.
And that also explains why we won't do it, because we don't think we can distinguish methodology from
Right.
from the
Yeah.
concept.
So
So that
exactly.
makes sense.
So there's just one more question about field work. If you're doing it, how long should you stay abroad for it to be relevant? Tricky question to answer.
How long should you stay abroad?
How long should the field work be for it
There's
to be?
no hard real. We are actually currently writing a book about field work and short field works and what you can do. It all depends what you do and what you're after. So that I can't give a sort of I can't say 1 month is enough or something like that. I think the answer more is that there's a very clear limit on how much you can do if you want to finish your thesis within the given time frame. And anything more than a month, I would start getting worried about. So it's not an ethnographic fieldwork classic, is it? It's something different we're doing here. I think students should also insist on this, in the sense that if they take the program seriously, then surely we wouldn't expect them to go out and do long-time fieldwork. It doesn't make sense. They need time to write their thesis.
And I have a clear answer. When the marginal benefits becomes lower than the marginal cost of doing the field work, you go home. Well,
And then there's one about how long, or if you you have to stay in Denmark for the writing, or if you. This is an ongoing debate because some people stay away and do it abroad. There's a lot of if you can be here, then that's a lot. It makes for a lot better contact, I think, in general, with the supervisor.
Yeah.
And if you are abroad doing it, then try to arrange to at least get here for some supervision. But people arrange Skype supervisions as well. So
again, this is where you want to be very clear with your supervisor about the expectations. Some supervisors do not like to do supervision via Skype, so they prefer to have people here. Other supervisors say, I can do this. We have no rules. You can write your thesis anywhere. But it's you want to have a good process, and in this process, the supervisor is an important part. And if the supervisor is not good at distance supervision, then I think it's a bad idea to stay abroad.
Also, you want to think about being in an academic environment. So even if you choose to write your thesis at home somewhere, make sure that you actually have library facilities, that you have somewhere to go and work, and that you discuss with people who are doing something similar. Otherwise, it can be a very difficult process. You need people to engage with.
So
I have two very quick questions in terms of looking for supervision within the staff. All levels of staff are available for supervision, or yes? Okay.
Yes, all levels of staff, including PhD students.
Yeah.
And PhD students can actually be interesting in many cases because they get very involved. Often when I talk about finding supervisors both at all kinds of levels, when you get in touch with a professor, he or she has a lot of knowledge and very little time. Whereas the going to the PhD level, they may have less knowledge, less experience, but they will devote much more time to your project. So there's a balance, and it's hard to say. It's also what you need, right? But you can get a very devoted supervisor if you go for a PhD or a postdoc or assistant professor.
I mean, we had one example the other day. Somebody wants to do something with Romas and bottle collection, in Copenhagen, and wrote to me, so anybody interested in this, not bottles, but and we happen to have a PhD student who had done this, who worked with Romas and among other things looking at bottle collectors in Copenhagen. So go there. And that's the person who would really know literature and would be really keen to discuss this with you. So think about that when you look around.
Is it possible to see, is there a list or some kind of PhD students?
Yeah, in the homepage.
They're all listed when you go to the department sites. We organize it in different ways. I think in economics we split between permanent staff and PhDs.
Right.
Anthropology, they have the
also.
same system, but I'm not sure info, but you can always find staff.
And there are keywords for what
Yes.
they're doing, so you can actually get an idea of what people are doing.
And you can search broadly, find a researcher, I think, and there you plug in the keywords and you start. And it's a bit like finding good literature. Right? There are search engines. Google it.
Camilla asks, just what part of the process is a supervisor supposed to be involved in? Only writing or also field work? Example, give advice to interview guides or surveys.
I think the whole bunch.
Yeah, I think that's the experience, not that supervisors are involved in the whole package.
Yeah. Yes.
But you only have so much time, so you might want to consider how you want to spend the time.
I think one thing about how much field work, I think the key thing here is not to wait. Some people were asking me whether they're planning to go on field work March, April. Now, if they're going to hand in the thesis 1st of June, that's too late to go off. So I said go earlier Go as early as possible. Go Christmas. Go.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah.
If you finish or you have exams, no? But the minute you can go off, you do it. Do not wait. You can't write your thesis before you're done. So.
In economics, we often say that you're using your supervisor actually for advice, not to correct your proofs, and proofs it in many ways, right? If the supervisor is not checking your data, cleaning your data if you need it, not proofreading your work, that's not the idea, right? So it's academic advice. But this academic advice also involves the process of gathering data in the best way, right? And as such, and the planning, of course. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify. The deadline to hand in, is it the 1st of June or the 1st of August?
It'll still be the 1st of August.
It's the 1st of August.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it hasn't changed that now, but it will change it.
Sure. And the other thing is my internship is a 6-month internship, so I can get full credit for it, but it ends on February 28th, which is less than helpful. Is there any way, like, can you, if I were to do the 3-month extension, because I'm really starting it at least a month late, but it's a full-time one, so I can't like do it simultaneously. Can I hand it in like only a month after and not wait for the full 3 months? So like I don't have to like wait a full 3 months and hand it in the second round?
Yeah, I think in some questions you can do that. There's usually some flexibility,
Okay.
but that really has to do with how ULA can plan around it,
Sure.
and which external examiners are available at given times, because that's sort of now it's started to fall into a pattern where they know that they have to be available there and there, so they might become less available in between, because it's becoming less and less flexible, so they become less and less flexible for good reasons. It's not a super clever structure, but that's the structure.
You don't sit and wait. You hand it in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And get a job. Sorry.
Trying.
So we probably have to round it up. But I think, as a general thing, don't worry too much about it. I mean, it's a lot of work and so on, but you are all super capable, and the history of this has shown so far that people are doing, they're doing great work, and the external examiners are, overall very impressed with what you guys come up with. So it's not something to be super worried about. You might be the statistic odd one off that's not doing great at all. But from a statistic point of view, you're doing pretty excellent. So so keep that in mind, that people do all kinds of different things, and they've gone through all kinds of different phases with, I don't know, because my background is this, and I'm not sure how to do that, and because there's a certain uncertainty, it's not following the silo, it's interdisciplinary, and all this kind of stuff. And it really turns out for the better when people work with it. That's the experience. The people have come up with really great work. And I think, as a rule of thumb, the teachers group as well, the supervisors, tend to be pretty happy as well with what people are doing, and the way that people structure their work and think about it, and the knowledge they have and so on. So don't worry. It's you have a solid background to do this.
And make sure you choose the topics that are close to your heart in some sense, right? Do not be strategic about these choices. That doesn't matter as such, right? You're going to work with this for quite a while. It will be great. So do something. Try to think of something that you will enjoy doing. That's why we're in research. Actually, we enjoy what we do. This part very, very much, and this is what you should try.
Also an advantage if there's material, right? So don't try to write a topic of something nobody has ever written a line about, because that just makes your work so much more difficult. You want to have literature to engage with, and No?
You were happy when you arrived. For some, I don't know.
They're hungry.
It's not
that's
so,
why.
Yeah, you're hungry. Oh, it's the sugar. Okay.
Blood sugar.
Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Engage and enjoy.
And there's the info on the internet and so on. And if you cannot find it there, I'm happy to be I'll happy to.
Maybe.
I'll be happy to help. No, I am very happy to help. So, send me an email and we'll work out the specifics. Because usually stuff comes up and there are always something that, does it apply to my specific situation or something like that. Don't be scared to send an email or give me a call sometimes. That's actually kind of nice as well. I don't get many calls. I get a lot of emails, but I don't get too many calls. It's kind of nice to talk to people. So please call me.
Good.
All right, guys. And people say hi to everyone.
Hi.
So, hi guys. And